Are we gonna? Where do you?
In that world, because to get the point across about, there is always a range, there's always uncertainty, there is always risk. How you calibrate those and how you, as Jay was saying, how you communicate those publicly is critical, but pretty challenging, frankly, in that environment.
Governor 𝗬𝗍𝗓?
Yes, we also carry out many simulation exercises about scenarios, but we have not, as far as I know, published them. We do discuss in our quarterly reports qualitatively what risks we have in mind. Mm-hmm. On top of that, I would say in a very rough way, we are carrying out something like a risk management approach to monetary policy making, which is probably a bit similar to what Christine was talking about yesterday. I can't come up with a good example, but risk scenarios, thinkings about tail risks sometimes do affect our monetary policy making.
Can I ask you all about the dollar, everyone's favorite subject? So when you tune out noise, right, of the past few months, what has really changed about the dollar? Governor, are we really seeing some sort of paradigm shift in the status as a reserve currency that means historians will look back on 2025 as some sort of pivotal year?
I don't think so, especially in case of Korea. Our Korean won has appreciated significantly in the last 2 months. But I think it's mostly due to the very unique situation that we had. We had a very unexpected, unnecessary martial law declaration in last December. And after that, this political risk, together with the slowdown of our economy, really make a Korean won depreciate much more than our fundamentals explain. So in some sense, the appreciation that we have observed in the last 2 months, in some sense, normalization of our currencies. And as for the kind of long-term shift of the dollar sentiment, we have discussions, but looks like people are talking about it. But at this moment, they keep the dollar assets while they're increasing the hedge ratios. So at this moment, I think the lion's share of the impact, BIS report show this one, is impact is mostly moving from the unhedged to the hedged positions. So we have to see what will happen in the future.
Yeah, Governor Bailey?
Well, I'd say two things. First of all, I think that it's important to bear in mind what the definition of a reserve currency is and how it's evolved over many years. So I like John Ray. I don't see there being a sort of a major shift at the moment. Not least because in this day and age, the definition of a reserve currency has as much to do with the supply of safe assets into the market that can be used for all the purposes of sort of collateral and security that they are, as much as it is about a sort of pure exchange rate. So I think we're a long way off that change happening. The second thing was going back to something Christine was saying earlier. I mean, when we look at financial conditions, which we do, of course, but I do think particularly, I always believe this, but I think it's even more relevant at the moment to unpack a financial conditions index. And the reason I say that is because we've seen a breakdown in the correlations of the components of a financial conditions index. So you look at sort of bond yields, you look at exchange rates, you look at equity risk premium, for instance. Those correlations are not the ones that we've tended to see established over time. So you have to look at it much more carefully. There are stories, to my mind, about each of the components of that. So when I look at the exchange rate, I look at it very much on that basis. I don't think it's sensible to sort of pack it all up as we normally would and say it's all behaving normally, because the correlations are not actually.
Governor 𝗬𝗍𝗓, there's also many colleagues at central banks, I guess, around the world are building up gold reserves. Is that the only real alternative to the dollar?
I think it's up to a certain extent what areas like Europe or China would do in terms of improving the efficiency or convenience of their currencies, like the kinds of things we were discussing this morning, capital markets integration, and these things will change the degree to which the role of the dollar may decline in the future.
I think I don't know if 2025 will be a pivotal year. I would tend to think that yes, it might very well be. But for a major change to occur will take a lot of time and will require a lot of effort. And I completely agree with the points made by Andrew about the dichotomy that we're seeing at the moment, and that might be an indication of the fact that investors are looking at options. This is what investors are saying. They ask questions, they seek alternatives, and whether that translates into a general lack of confidence that will be further fueled by more uncertainty, more unpredictability, a bit of a jump in the unknown on several fronts, not just monetary policy, not just even the economics, but beyond that, in terms of security at large, for instance, I think remains to be seen. It's not going to happen just like that overnight. It never did historically. There's no reason it should now, but there is clearly something that has been broken, and whether it is fixable or whether it is going to continue to be broken, I think the jury is out on that front.
And Chair Powell, how do you think we'll look back on 2025?
So when you're asking me how we're going to look back on 2025?
Yeah, how will historians look back on this year? Is it pivotal?
It's clearly an important year. There's a lot going on, with trade, and I think I'm hopeful that we'll look back on it as a year where we successfully challenged some significant economic changes, and our job is to make sure that is the case.
You get attacked by the president a lot on a personal basis. Does it make your job harder?
I'm very focused on just doing my job. I mean, there are things the things that matter are using our tools to achieve the goals that Congress has given us: maximum employment, price stability, financial stability, and that's what we focus on, 100%.
Madame Lagarde, if you were in the same position as Chair Powell, would you do anything differently?
I think I speak for myself, but I speak for all colleagues on the panel. I think we would do exactly the same thing as our colleague 𝗕𝗓𝗄 does. The same thing. Yeah. Right?
Yes.
Governor Bailey, is the rest of the world decoupling from America but pulling tighter elsewhere? How do you see fragmentation happening?
Well, fragmentation, were it to happen, in my view, is bad for activity in the world economy. No question about that. I mean, if we reduce the openness of the world economy, that will be bad for activity in the world economy. Now, I temper that in one respect, because obviously we have learnt a lot about the robustness of supply chains over the last 5 years, and it is of course appropriate that there will be adjustments to that. But if we see a breakdown of the openness of the world economy sort of beyond that sort of resilience that we do see as needed, then that's bad for activity, it's bad for the world economy, and that I'm afraid is something that I think we need to be very clear. I've said a number of times, look, there are reasons why this is happening. It's not right to just go around saying this is all wrong. There are no reasons why this is happening. What I think is very important is that we get back to a governance of the world economy where we can address these issues in the appropriate multilateral fora, and get to the question of what lies behind these issues, what's at the root of these issues, what exactly are the issues, and what do we do about them. And I can't emphasize this enough, that I think it's an obligation for all of us who are obviously very heavily involved in the governance of the world economy. We've all got very big responsibilities to say that is our duty, to get back and to the process of saying, what's caused this and what do we do about it, and what do we deduce are the underlying issues and how do we address them? Because otherwise, say fragmenting the world economy is a bad outcome.
But what kind of fragmentation would it be? Is it, again, are you fearful that the world is splintering irrevocably, or is there a pool that's just moving?
Well, I think if it was a breakdown of trade in the world economy, obviously exactly how that would manifest itself would remain to be seen. But it would be running against a long period now where we've been building the resilience of trade in the world economy. We've been building openness. But as I said, I want to sort of temper that by saying, look, there are issues. I don't think we should say there are no issues. This is all made up. There are issues, and we need to address what they are and work them out. But we need to do that in the context of a commitment to a robust, open world economy.
Governor Lee, as the only governor here representing a non-reserve currency country, how concerned are you about fragmentation of the global financial system and the risk at the end of the day that the U.S. may be less willing to provide dollar liquidity in a future financial shock?
No. I think I mentioned that we are quite vulnerable to the fragmentation, but in reality, as a small country, it's a pity that we can raise our voice, but in reality, we cannot change the course. So we have to probably take it as an environment and to adapt to it. What matters is we talk about economic fragmentation, but for a country like us, the most serious issue is combined with security. And for that issue, let me stop here because I don't want to go further. But as for the dollar liquidity support, as demonstrated during the global financial crisis and pandemic period, the standing dollar swap lines with 5 international financial centers and the 9 ad hoc temporary swap lines for the 9 non-reserve currencies, that was crucial in restoring the stability in the global world. And if another global dollar shortage hits, I believe that the U.S. Fed will extend their swap lines again, which is very important. And but one other problem for a country like us is we know that the U.S. provide ad hoc swap lines as long as there is a global dollar shortage. But issue is what happens if there is our own problem and there is no global dollar shortage. Our understanding is that Fed cannot extend the swap lines in that case, and we have to self-defense ourselves. That is why I think having a adequate, sufficient level of reserves is very important. And recently, thanks to the introduction of the FEMA repo facility by the Fed, actually these reserves become much more effective tool to defend ourselves.
Jay Powell, on fragmentation?
Well, I guess I'll just agree with what Chang Young said, which is, or point out that nothing has changed relative to our swap lines. We still have the same authorities, and we're still prepared to use them in situations where it's within our legal authorities and where we think it makes sense. So that is, we're aware that that's a big contribution that we can and do and will continue to make to global financial stability.
Governor Ueda, how much do you think about fragmentation and the impact this could have on Japan?
See, on the trade side, I think a lot about what will happen to Asia, even Asia excluding China. So this will depend on the relative tariff rates imposed on the region relative to China or relative to other countries. But there's a fairly strong intra-regional trade taking place during the last decade or two. Also, there's new countries like India growing at very high speed. So I hope there's a sufficiently resilient domestic demand in the region to keep the energy of the region alive. On the financial side, I don't have much to add to what other people have said, but it would be important to keep trying a multi-layered approach to things like swap lines. We have 𝗕𝗏 initiatives in Asia. Doing something similar or continuing to do something similar would be important.
Madam Lagarde, you've often spoken about the role that Europe could take in a fragmented world. How do you see that developing in what kind of time frame?
Well, I think Europe has witnessed in the last 4 years, in particular, well, since 2022 in particular, the last 3 years, major challenges to its way of doing business, to the assumptions that it has made about security, about supply, about destination. Whether you look at what the horrible Russian invasion of Ukraine has precipitated and how that has impaired the the sentiment of security that we in Europe had, and the sentiment that we could, forever rely on the protection of others, that has been impaired significantly. When you look at the energy supply on which some of the European countries in particular, but most of us, have relied upon, namely access to reasonably cheap oil and gas supply from Russia, that has been impaired significantly, and we had to find the resources to respond to that. And whether you look at the business model of some countries where destination was inevitably China in the main, that has already been challenged as a result of the fragmentation that is not just a risk but which has happened. If you combine that with the technology risk that we could all be under, either because of political determination or because of shortage of supply, whether it's on the front of microchips or rare earth, I think we are in a situation where many of the assumptions have been shaken up and where we collectively are on the cusp of, I hope, this is my hope, of better taking hold and control of our destiny by making significant structural efforts to be more independent, be more proactive, be more autonomous in all these different dimensions. Is it going to happen overnight? Yet again, no, because on some of those fronts it takes time, it takes investment, it takes political determination, it takes momentum. And, from a pure sort of, as president of the ECB, what we can do on the monetary front is to deliver on our mandate of providing price stability so that the fluidity of factors that is needed, both in terms of capital, in terms of labor, can rest assured that price stability will be within our remit under strict commitment to deliver on our target of 2% medium term. But yes, I think it's historically, I believe that in a few years' time we will look at 25 of those latest 3 years as significant change in the way in which we conduct our life, our business, and develop Europe, and I hope for the better.
Chair Powell, last year in Sintra, you said that the U.S. cannot run these kind of deficits in good economic times for very long, and then you also said we'll have to do better sooner, something sooner or later, and sooner will be better than later. How's it going?
So, of course, I probably preface that by saying that we don't comment on fiscal policy. That is the one thing that I have said, and my predecessors have also said, and that is the U.S. federal fiscal path is not a sustainable one. The level of the debt is sustainable, but the path is not, and we need to address that sooner or later. Sooner is better than later. That's what I said last year. There's not a lot more I can say.
For everyone else, how much of a problem for the world are America's public finances? Governor Lee?
We have to see what's going to happen. But as I mentioned, we take it as environment, and we just adjust our policies accordingly.
I don't comment on our fiscal policy, let alone anybody else's.
Anyone else want to take that question? Last year, Governor 𝗬𝗍𝗍𝗘, actually you spoke 2 years ago at this ECB conference. It was your first public appearance overseas after taking the current role in April 2023, and you talked about your surprise with the tight schedule of a central governor. Are you getting used to the schedule? Is it ramping up? Is it even more than when you started?
It's still very tight.
Is it tighter than before? How are you finding yourself after more than 2 years in the job?
It's as tight as 2 years ago.
So it hasn't changed?
Getting used to it a little bit, yes.
Governor, what's your biggest task for the rest of your term until 2028?
Well, as I was saying at the outset, headline inflation is above 2. Underlying inflation is below 2. I want both to converge to 2% by the time I leave my office.
I think you were also asked what keeps you awake at night in Washington in October, and you talked about the pace of rate hikes as one thing. Is it still the same, or do you have other things that you're worrying about?
Let's see. I didn't sleep well last night. There's a reason for this. Governor Yi was sitting next to me during dinner, and he told me that espresso contains less caffeine than coffee. So I immediately had a cup of espresso.
I meant the total amount of caffeine rather than caffeine per ounce, okay?
Anyway, this is a joke, but during these international meetings, I get chances to talk to my colleagues, get a lot of useful insight. So when I go to bed, I think about those and say to myself, maybe I should adjust our economic outlook, our policy strategy in response to these nice comments. And these keep me sometimes awake, but it's a nice thing to do to keep the trust in ourselves, which is the very foundation of what we do among central bankers.
Hey, to all of you, what keeps you awake at night, given all of the uncertainties and the changing world? Madame Lagarde.
First of all, I can confirm what 𝗕𝗂𝗏 just said, because it did happen on occasions that the following day, after probably a difficult night, you came to see me and said, did you really say that yesterday during the meeting? And I knew that you had been sort of ruminating and pondered what